Well, one thing people always ask is how and why I'm interested in why and how I'm interested in women's suffrage, and it's really kind of a long story. When I was a graduate student, I had to choose a thesis topic, and I somehow got assigned to the progressive movement in Nevada. And this was a period of reform from 1900 up to about 1917, and it included labor legislation, it included the women's suffrage movement, a number of reforms, and that's where I first ran on to Ann Martin. And I didn't pursue the progressive movement as a historical topic. What I did is took something that I think is easier, and it was the Nevada volunteers in the Spanish-American War and the Philippine insurrection. And I guess I'm the world's foremost authority on the Nevada volunteers. Not that anybody cares. But I did do some research into who Ann Martin was, because I'd never heard of her before. And then I noticed how much material there was, and I thought about trying to take that as a thesis topic, but it had already been preempted by a lady who was doing her PhD on the Nevada Women Suffrage movement. So that's how I came to be interested in this. And then over the years, doing that column, what I did was I ran onto a lot of little things about women and women's suffrage and like that, and so I began collecting all of those, and I've got a whole lot of other information other than what I'm going to give you today. But today I'm going to talk about the women's suffrage movement, which took place between 1914 and between 1910 and 1914. Nevada and Montana were the last two states in the American West to adopt women's suffrage. All the other states except those two. And if you look at a map, of course, Nevada is just a black blot in the middle of suffrage states. As you probably know, of course, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, granting women the right to vote, passed state ratification in August of 1920. So Nevada women had the vote about 6 years before the women throughout the country did. The origins of the women's movement, and I won't go into this much, it had its origins really in the 1848 Women's Rights Convention and a Women's Declaration of Independence, and this was in New York. The issues were votes for women, temperance, education, anti-slavery, job opportunities, equal pay, anything like that came up in this, and they went into the Women's Declaration of Independence. The Civil War precedents in the 1860s were the 15th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, providing equal protection of the laws, the vote for former black slaves, and this was debated in Congress. And women were lobbying Congress, and they said, look, we're talking about freedom and equal rights for former black slaves, yet women were much and very heavily involved in the abolitionist movement and the movement to do away with slavery, but it didn't do any good. The Congress simply left women out. The only thing that was there was just males. That's it. They lost on all counts, and that later went to the Supreme Court, both the 14th and 15th Amendment, and the Supreme Court said that neither the 14th or 15th Amendment granted suffrage for women, and that was in the 1870s. There were lots of women's organizations, individuals who carried the suffrage campaign on into the 20th century. A lot of reform organizations. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, for example, that's probably the leading reform organization, the best known, I think, because the WCTU, they were against alcohol and saloons and things like that. Yeah, nothing was more precious to males in this country than saloons and liquor and things like that. And as a matter of fact, I think if the women had not been so intent on doing away with liquor and the temperance movement like that, suffrage might have come a lot sooner. But they simply didn't. The women learned to organize. They involved themselves with public matters, political matters. They influenced their husbands, all of that sort of thing. Women in Nevada, of course, in 1869, when the 15th Amendment was being debated in Congress, they also debated that in the Nevada legislature, and they were looking to remove the words male and whites from the Nevada Constitution, and of course it didn't work. It worked the first time. The way we amend our Constitution in Nevada is, of course, that it has to pass two resolutions, one after the other, two legislative sessions, and then go to the voters, the next election. So it could take as long as 6 years to amend the Constitution. An assemblyman, Curtis J. Hilliard of Virginia City, spoke up for women's rights. And virtually covered everything that was in the Women's Declaration of Independence. And it passed in 1869 legislature and then failed in 1870. In 1870 there was a suffrage convention in Battle Mountain. Both men and women took part. There was support from some Nevada editors, and there was also in this same period of time a lady by the name of Frances A. Williamson, who was a school teacher in Austin, and she was the one that established the first suffrage group, the Lucy Stone Equal Suffrage League. Did you ever hear of Lucy Stone? Okay, Lucy Stone was she a physician? I'm not sure. Anyway, she was one of the first women, and she graduated, I believe, from Oberlin or one of those religious colleges back east. And they thought a lot of Lucy Stone. Frances A. Williamson organized chapters around the state. She went around, she was a teacher, but she was also interested in public matters. She actually wrote a book. She actually wrote a book on public issues and like that. And the women under Nevada laws at that time, one of the things, they lacked property rights. After marriage, they only had property rights with their husband's permission. No right to their own salary if they worked. Men didn't have to support their families. There was a lack of employment opportunities, work only with their husband's permission. And lots of miscellaneous provisions in the laws and in the Constitution that bothered women. Women formed reform groups. I mentioned the WCTU, but the concerns for education for children, restricting prostitution locations, limiting the number of saloons, support for churches, employment, equal pay, women's networks, influence with their husbands, things like this. One of the things that they brought up, of course, was the age of consent for females. And we know what they're talking about, consent. In Nevada, there was no law dealing with consent. And every other state, of course, they said that a female could not consent to sexual relations until they were at least 16 years old. In Nevada, there was nothing like that. So that's one of the issues that they took up. The suffrage campaign, 1912 to 14. One of the things you have to remember is that Nevada was very heavily dominated by males, very heavily male-dominated. The 1910 census showed 100 females for every 180 males. The demographics, they often referred to it as a floating male population. Most men were single, about 51%, and the single women were 21%. And the men were often cowboys and miners and just transients passing through, and if they worked at all, they would be willing to sell their vote to their employer, anything like that. And I really think Nevada was really behind a lot of the other Western states. One of the things that came up again and again was the progress that other states had made, particularly Colorado. They had made since women had the right to vote. You know, and women in Colorado had the right to vote, I think, until the early 1890s. But they said that Colorado makes a lot of progress. And one of the reasons that Western states adopted women's suffrage is they wanted to attract women to come out here. They wanted to attract marriageable females to come out. And one of the arguments for suffrage made here in Nevada was that no female who would be worth associating with is going to disenfranchise herself by moving to the state of Nevada. And that's exactly what happened. In other words, she'd have the vote in Utah, and Colorado, Arizona, California, Washington, Oregon, all of that. But as soon as she stepped across the line into Nevada, she disenfranchised herself. And they said that no woman who is worthy of marrying or associating with is going to do that. The stable male population element in Nevada was very much in favor of women's suffrage, and I'm talking about educators, newspaper editors, clergymen, businessmen, people who had some permanent interest here, and they realized that it was important to give women a right to vote. And they said that you give these men a right to vote, and most of them are married. You know, you're also going to give women the right to vote as well. So that's something that's not often pointed out in Nevada, just how male-dominated we were. The attitudes of many males, of course, no tradition of women speaking out on public matters. Traditional males didn't want women taking part in the rough and tumble of political life. The saloons, gambling, prostitution interests. Men knew that women didn't want the right to vote as a philosophical matter necessarily. They realized that women wanted to do what? Close saloons, shut down brothels, all of that kind of thing. And of course, this kind of thing never came up in the newspapers. You know, they never said that. But women, that's what they were involved in. As far as Anne Martin was concerned, you probably know a lot more about Anne Martin than I do. She was a native Nevadan, born in Empire in 1875, University of Nevada graduate, Stanford graduate, and she first became involved in the suffrage movement in England. And the story is that she was in 1911. She was taking part in the suffrage parade in England, and that she hit a bobby over the head with a sign that said "Votes for Women." Votes for women. And as historians, we've never really been able to deal with that story, you know. And apparently, what happened is that she was marching in the suffrage parade, and Bobby was beating up an older woman, you know, one of the London policemen, and she went to her assistance and got arrested and thrown in jail. And also another myth, of course, is that Herbert Hoover bailed her out when she was in London. Herbert Hoover was there. he went down to the station house and visited her, and she was sick by that time, some kind of stomach flu, something like that. Anyway, she was bailed out by Lord Pethick Lawrence, who was an Englishman, who was a supporter of the right to vote for the women in England. But nevertheless, that was her introduction. And also another thing that comes up that some people don't want to admit is that Anne Martin was a member of the Fabian Society. Did you ever hear of the Fabians? Fabians were socialists. They were very, very conservative socialists, but socialists nevertheless. And some people just simply don't want that mentioned. They simply don't. And I've never quite understood that. You know, when the lady that wrote the book, The Long Campaign on Anne Martin, I asked her about that, you know, because I read the manuscript before she submitted it for publication. And I said, you know, Anne Martin was a socialist. And if you read that book, you know, The Long Campaign, you can't quite figure out whether Anne Martin was a socialist or not. But I look at the kind of reform she was involved in, and like that. And of course, it did come up in the Nevada campaign a couple of times. You know, that she had been involved in the socialist movement, and also it came up that she had been involved in the militancy and the violence in the English campaign, and it was really pretty bizarre what was going on over there. But Anne Martin said that, well, that women in England had been suppressed for so many decades and centuries that they couldn't do anything else but engaged in violent behavior. They went around, for example, throwing torches in mailboxes and chaining themselves to the fence at Buckingham Palace and things like that. But Anne Martin always said, you know, we don't need to do that, you know, in Nevada. You know, we can convince the men that vote for women is only it's only right. We don't have to do that. When Anne Martin came back to this country in January 1912, in February she involved herself with the Nevada Equal Franchise Society, which had been established in 1910, and it had a total membership of 14 women. 14 women. And Anne Martin said, you know, well, you know, if we're going to get anywhere, we've got to expand our membership. And one of the things she did is set up a press bureau, and then she made contacts with women in every county who were kind of community leaders. They were club women. They were women who had been engaged in public matters and things like that. And she established a press bureau here in Reno. The county libraries, she made sure that they had books on women's suffrage. The women established women's discussion groups, suffrage theatrical performances, for example, card parties to attract women, raise funds, things like that. What happened in May of 1914, they had good roads days here in Nevada. And that was a period of time when the automobile was just coming in, and the state was beginning to become involved in construction of roads and things like that. Governor Tasker Oddie, in May 1914, established Good Roads Day, in which men would come out and they would spend the day working on the roads. It used to be that there was a tax you had to pay every year if you didn't do a certain amount of work on the roads individually and like that. And what the women in Reno did is they found out how many men were out there working on the roads, and then what they did is packed up lunches and cold lemonade and things like that. And put them in cars, and the cars all had signs, of course, that said votes for Nevada Women. And they went out all of the areas around Reno, Dog Valley, all of the places like that, and passed out lunches to the men. And of course they didn't say, we'll give you a lunch if you'll vote for us. And Ann Martin is smarter than that. And the women just went out and passed out lunches. There was music. There was poetry. For example, there was a song, "Let the Lassies Try." Do you want me to sing?
Yeah, sure.
I can sing. If a lassie wants a ballot to help run the town, if a lassie needs a ballot, need a laddie frown. Many a laddie has a ballot, not so bright as I. Many a laddie writes his ballot, overcome with rye. Every laddie has a franchise, none they say have I. Hands and hearts for service, let the lassies try. If a lassie works for wages, toiling all the day, when her work the laddie's equals, give her equal pay. If a body pays the taxes, surely you'll agree. A body earns a franchise, whether he or she. Somebody wrote that, and I think it was originally a poem, and somebody just set it to music and like that. Another poem called "The Bivouac of the Bread," and there was and I'll talk about it a little later. There was an anti-suffrage movement among many women in Nevada, an anti-suffrage movement. Why they were against? Well, they were just conservatives in general, but they were going around and they were giving lectures and programs about why women shouldn't have the right to vote, and like that. And they were saying that the women that wanted the right to vote were radicals. They would neglect their families, things like this. And somebody wrote a poem, and I'll read it here. It's called "The Bivouac of the Bread." As a matter of fact, this came out of Eureka, and there weren't enough suffragettes in Eureka to engage in some kind of a contest about pie baking or bread baking, so it was never held. The poetry goes as follows: "The flour through the shifter whirls, the smothered yeast cakes cry, proclaim to all the listening world the suffrage battle cry. That the anxious antis sneer no more, but shrink in shuddering dread. Their arguments fall flat before the bivouac of the bread. Till they beside their kitchen stoves can line their pantry shelves with rows of crisp and fluffy leaves that they have baked themselves. Till they the sponge can deftly pat to fleecy fluffy foam. Let them not tell their sisters that their place is in the home." In other words, it's very important for women to be able to take care of things like that. "The hand that fashions golden crust and crullers brown and light, we fancy we can surely trust to mark a ballot right. As long as we remain well fed, while here below we dwell, we'll think the hand that needs the bread must need the vote as well." So that was around. I don't know how many of you appreciate poetry, but I sometimes think in many ways the poets, they get it right. They get it right. Here's another one. Said Sam to Joe in fierce debate upon the woman question. "You've answered well on all other points. Now here's my last question. Who then, I ask, will stay at home and rock and tend the baby?" Well, since the question seems to turn on this as on its axis, just get the one who rocked the baby when she went to pay her taxes. And of course, taxation without representation was a big issue. Other campaign aspects, of course, is that Ann Martin had had a national connection between women, particularly women in New York and New England who were seeking the vote, and women in the Midwest. And she quite often went back to New York and to Boston, and she would give lectures. And she was a very popular figure back there because at that point in time, they still figured the West was the Wild West, and they didn't realize that the people out here are as civilized as any other. We have schools, we have churches, we have white picket fence around our houses, we plant flowers, we plant trees, things like that. But Ann Martin, coming from the West and coming from Nevada particularly, raised quite a bit of money in the East for the suffrage movement. Other supporters came from other Western suffrage states. Reform examples explained in the Nevada campaign. Reforms from other suffrage states surrounding Nevada, and also a lot of support from organized labor. And organized labor at that time, as I said, this is part of the progressive movement, and organized labor had an agenda of all kinds of reforms. The 8-hour day, the 40-hour week, for example. How many of you have thought about the 8-hour day? Do you realize how many men died fighting for the 8-hour day? Did you ever hear of the Haymarket rioters in Chicago and like that? And 8-hour day, 40-hour week, industrial accident insurance, industrial safety laws, industrial inspections, labor laws for women, equal pay for men and women, things like that. And when people think about history, they oftentimes don't think of that. What's duller than to talk about labor legislation? People think, well, we've always had the 8-hour day, 40-hour week. Not true. And the labor realized, of course, that women were involved in lots of reforms. The Republican Party leaders in Nevada were often opposed, and the political leaders of the Democratic Party were, I can't say they were much in support, but they were much in support above the Republicans. Very, very, very much. The Democrats, the Socialists, for example, the party leaders of the Socialists were much in favor of suffrage. The members also, there were, during this period, 1910 to 1914, there were socialist lectures that came through Nevada. Most of them came out of California, but they'd come across the state and they would give lectures on socialism and spoke out on women's suffrage. There was some concern that socialist economic activities would hurt the suffrage campaign. Some fear of that. And there were many socialists in Nevada, and you have to remember that the Socialist Party at this time was still a legitimate political party, and all of this was to change with World War I and the things that happened in the 1920s. The opposition to women's suffrage and an organization entitled Women Opposed to Equal Suffrage. And there was a Nevada branch of a national organization. There were tours by anti-suffrage women, and there was a charge that women were radicals, and that they were foreign-born, and that they didn't care about the home, and that they didn't care about children, anything like that. In point of fact, the Nevada women involved in Nevada Equal Franchise Society were club women, they were stable housewives, they were otherwise conservative family supporters. The anti-suffragettes were not well marked, were not well organized. They were not well organized. And when you look at where they sent suffrage lectures, they came up along the railroad. They came to Reno, Wadsworth, Lovelock, Winnemucca, Elko, and like that. Do you think any anti-suffrage lectures would end up in Gull Point or in Tuscarora or some of these places that are really difficult to get to? It wasn't true. So they were not well organized. Among the anti people imposed the right to vote was Billy Booth, who was the editor of the Tonopah Bonanza, and he was the main source of opposition in central and southern Nevada. But most newspaper editors, I think, were very supportive of women's suffrage. They realized that it was an idea whose time had come. Others against the women were George Wingfield, and most of you probably know of George Wingfield, a very wealthy, a very popular capitalist, moneyed entrepreneur, banker, things like this. And he said at one point, he threatened to leave Nevada if women got the right to vote. If women got the right to vote. Other editors did not take him seriously. And one of them, Frank Garside, Art Garside of the Manhattan Post, wrote the following poem. "We'll be sorry, George, to lose you, but where are you going to go? Now that the women are voting from Florida to Idaho, Utah, Washington, Oregon have fallen into line with California and Kansas with votes for the feminine. In Australia they're doing it, and in Iceland's frigid zone. Seems they're voting everywhere and coming close to home. The hand that rocks the cradle can scarcely do its ruling, unless that hand the ballot holds, and it won't stand no fooling. Nevada's not the greatest state, and if it ever hopes to be among the best ones, let the women have their vote." Let the women have their vote. This poem was picked up by newspapers all over the country, and it just embarrassed the hell out of George Wingfield, because he was like our friend from southern Nevada, Clyde Bundy. He just opens his mouth and you know what an idiot he is. So that's what happened. The 1914 election, 10,936 to 7,258. In other words, about 10 to 7 voting for and in favor of women's suffrage. The suffrage amendment lost 4 counties. It lost all 10 precincts in Reno, but it carried the precincts in Sparks, which was kind of a labor community, railroads. It lost Orangeby County, Carson City. There was no outside vote there. It also lost Story County, basically Virginia City, but carried whatever rural areas were there. It also lost Eureka County, lost the town of Eureka, but it carried the rural areas. And Ann Martin had always thought, and she had the history of the California campaign, that it was really the rural areas that were going to carry it for the women, and this is apparently the case in Nevada. And Ann Martin felt that the saloon, brothel, and liquor interest lost it for the 4 counties that did, voted against it, but there was no analysis of this because the vote had been won. She said, we don't need to fiddle with that anymore. We've got other things to other things to do. How did the women use their vote? Suffrage groups remained organized. They changed their names. Eventually, a good many of them came to be the League of Women Voters. They were organized to get women registered to vote, study and debate issues, influence elected officials, and organized a push through to get the 19th Amendment. Because even though Nevada was now no longer that black block in the middle of the West, women still needed to vote elsewhere. So They organized to push the 19th Amendment through to give the vote to women all over the country. And as I said, it passed in August 1920. If you do any analysis of the women's vote, you'll also find that they divided on party lines, class lines, just as did men, but they were somewhat less effective than if they had remained together as a group, which they didn't, and women are just like men today. They have all kinds of divisions. As far as Ann Martin is concerned, she ran for the Senate in 1918 or 1920, unsuccessfully. She later worked for child and maternal health legislation in Washington, D.C., the so-called Shepherd-Towner Act. She helped organize the National Women's Party in 1916, and she was involved in the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which was an anti-war group, an interest in international peace. She was interested in trying to do away with the international slave traffic, prostitution, and the international control of narcotics trade. So she did quite a lot. And she didn't die until 1951. And I always like to leave a little time for you to ask questions or raise issues or complaints or whatever. Does anybody have any questions? Anything?
I do.
What?
I do.
Go ahead.
And this is way before your time, but before you came to the Historical Society. But Ann Martin's papers were taken bankrupt essentially because the Historical Society or Nevada didn't particularly want them, but they were on loan. And then Nevada was never really interested in getting them back. Yeah. What was the rationale? Because it's really hard to get
Ann Martin and the lady that ran the Historical Society, Jeannie Weir, did not get along. And Jeannie Weir refused to do anything with the papers. Matter of fact, Jeannie Weir's house was down on 9th Street, and the papers, Ann Martin's papers, somehow ended up in a kind of a little wooden shack behind Jeannie Weir's house, and it would rain, the rain would come on them, and they were afraid the thing would burn and like that. And Ann Martin at that time was living in Palo Alto, down by Stanford and like that. And what she did is talk to a professor at the University of California in Berkeley, a history prof. And so what he did is he was very practical. He had a couple of students, and they had a pickup, and he just sent them to Reno, and they just told them where the papers were, and they just went and got them and put them in the back of the pickup and took them off to Berkeley, and that's where they are. Otherwise they would be here.
But they were offered back here because they were only on loan for a year.
Supposedly.
Jeannie
Weir wouldn't have them.
She then refused.
She generally refused. I spent some time at the University of California at Berkeley going through the Ann Martin papers, and I've got a sheaf of things that I typed and like that on the Ann Martin papers, and they're here and they never get used.
Oh.
They never get used. As a matter of fact, they're at my house right now. Those kinds of papers. Are there any other questions?
I'd like to comment or ask. I read someplace that the Historical Society was basically all the documents, most of the documents were being moved from Jeannie Weir's place to the basement of the public library. And they were not being taken care of by historians. They were just being dumped in there.
They were.
Yeah.
Yep, that
and
happened.
That's the reason Ann Martin's things.
Yeah, that happened. I don't think personally Jeannie Weir was a good administrator. I think she didn't really care about a lot of things that I care about. Like that. Yeah, but it wasn't done correctly. It's a question
what was
about
the
here.
argument about between Weir and
What?
Martin? What was the divisiveness between the two of them?
I think it was the kind of differences that women have with each other.
No.
That's not an answer.
Part of it was the fact that they met at Stanford, and when Ann Martin decided to take a leave of absence from Nevada State University,
Yeah.
Jeannie Weir came up and took her
That's right.
place.
That's
And
right.
then she refused to leave when Ann Martin came back.
I think there was also that. Yeah.
It's called
There
competition.
was also that. Question comes up, was Ann Martin a radical? I don't think so. You know, if you look at the Fabians in England, they were not radicals. They were very, very conservative socialists, and they're still organized, by the way. Well, a lot of women thought, you know, if we only got the vote, it will take care of all the problems of this country. You know, women can get the right to vote. Well, you know, as we all know, we're almost 100 years since women got the right to vote, and in Nevada. And you know, the issues just keep coming. The issues are there, and it is not going to. It's not going to become a heaven or anything else. It's simply not. And I think women should have known that they're going to divide by party and class and everything else, and that issues are simply going to come up, and that women are going to deal with them the same way that men deal with them. You know, they're going to divide by party and all of that. Yeah, is there more? Yes.
Why did she, how did those two campaigns go for her when she ran for Senate, and why do you think she lost both times?
Why do I
if
think
she was a smart politician.
I think she's a smart politician. I think she raised a lot of issues, but I think that she was running the first time. She was running the first time against Charles Henderson in 1918, and this was to serve the last 2 years of the term for the senator that died, and the second time she ran against Tasker Oddie, and Oddie was very popular, and like that. And I think it was a matter of politics and the fact that there were enough men who simply, they may have believed in women having the right to vote, but they didn't particularly like Ann Martin. And one of the things that Ann Martin did, she was opposed to World War I. She was opposed to World War I
during that time,
and that was an issue at that time. Of course, there were many Americans opposed to that, but you know, it was in World War I that the socialists got a bad reputation, and they've never recovered from that to this very day. So I think that was it. Have you read Ann Howard's book, The Long Campaign?
I haven't. I need to go find it. I
Okay.
will.
Okay, it's called The Long Campaign.
Is it-
Her name is Ann Howard.
Yes, it's in the library over here in the bookstore. I can buy it.
Yeah, we have it. We have it.
Perfect.
And if you're interested, you know, she goes into some detail on that.
And
Yeah.
there was another factor too. Ann Martin ran as an independent, and there was a Republican
Well, she
and
did.
Democrat.
She did.
She's third party.
Whoa.
She did. She did. Yes.
What was her source of income that she was able to do all that traveling?
She had a private income. Her father was a banker, W.H. Martin, and he was a banker and a businessman. And she had certainly plenty of money, adequate money, and things like that. And you know, she used her ties and her influence. At one point in time, there was a bank that would not. I don't know what it was. They wouldn't pay their female employees on the same level as their males and things like that. And Ann Martin said that she was closing her account there, and she did. And the word got out, and other women did. And after 3 or 4 very, very, you know, substantial women closed the account, the bank had second thoughts about that. Had second thoughts. Yeah. Yes.
One of the things that we talked about in our annual meeting before you joined us is that the Nevada Humanities gave us a grant to build a suffrage Centennial site, and we're starting on that with timelines and documentation. So, do we have permission to consult with you and borrow things and have you help us make that an academic
By all means.
site? Thank
By
you.
all
Yeah.
means.
Are there any more questions?
Are there other questions? No complaints? Did you like my singing? I'm not a singer, and I don't know, I'm just not into that kind of thing. But I thought to myself that was interesting. And that's the kind of thing women would do, would be poetry and songs and theaters
And lunch.
and lunch and books in libraries, and influencing their husbands and talking about things over the breakfast table, And of course, we don't know what goes on in the home, it's nobody's business, but women obviously talk to their husbands about issues. They had always done that since the earliest days of the Comstock, and they did that. They do that to this very day. Very day. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you and a gift certificate for you for your time. We appreciate it very much.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.